Before we begin, allow me to paint you the full picture. General Radahn is cursed ever to wander. Howling at the sky.
If the Elden Ring is that which commands the stars, then what does that mean for General Radahn, strongest of the demigods who conquered the stars, earning him the sobriquet Starscourge? Despite Radahn not having a single line of dialogue, he is one of the most interesting characters to me, and also one of the first we ever saw back during Elden Ring's initial announcement, who gave us an idea of the game's aesthetic. So today, we'll go over his character. Typically, I'd start with the name, but I've been unable to find anything too noteworthy in regards to the name Radahn, other than its obvious connection to Radagon, Radahn's biological patriarch. His siblings too have names of a similar vein, Ranni and Rykard. And how about that which he is known by, Starscourge? In this context, it more or less means that he is an affliction to the stars, or in other words, he bested them, conquered them in fact. In the Japanese translation this is Starbreaker or Star Crusher, you get the idea. But what does it mean to conquer the stars? Well, to get there, let's take a look at what we know about Radahn, starting with his youth. Recall how I mentioned that Radagon was Radahn's biological patriarch. Whilst this is true, it seems he respected and looked up to Godfrey as much as his own father. There isn't much to suggest that Radahn had any distaste for Radagon in particular, as whilst Radagon despised his red hair, Radahn wore his proudly. Indeed, whilst I mentioned that Radahn has no spoken dialogue, there are quotes attributed to him. "I was born a champion's cub. Now I am the lord of the battlefield's lion." This suggests that Radahn had great respect for both Radagon and Godfrey, the title Lord of the Battlefield speaking to Godfrey's might as the first Elden Lord. Was Radahn even born before Godfrey and his warriors were tarnished and exiled? There's no concrete information there, yet based on what Miriel tells us, it seems probable, at least. Radagon waged 2 wars against Aeonia, the second of which ended with him marrying Rennala and making peace, and then, I quote, "However, when Godfrey, first Elden Lord, was hounded from the lands between, Radagon left Rennala to return to the Erdtree capital, becoming Queen Marika's second husband and king consort, taking the title of second Elden Lord." It is very hard to know the exact timeline here, but it does seem to suggest that Radahn, knowing Godfrey, as opposed to just knowing of Godfrey, was a possibility. Indeed, whilst Radahn was born to Rennala and Radagon, presumably in Aeonia, he seems to have spent much of his youth in the town of Celia, in Caelid. As such, we can assume that if Radahn had ever spoken, his accent would either be Welsh Leonian or whatever accent they have in Caelid. Either way, it was in the town of Celia Radahn learned gravity sorcery, the reason ostensibly being to be with his scrawny horse for all time. Incidentally, I seem to recall that Radahn's horse was named Leonard, but I genuinely can't find where I got that name from. And here is where things get a little controversial for some. There are 2 possibilities when it comes to Radahn, and more specifically his size. The first is that he was once far smaller and experienced an unnatural growth spurt, developing into the giant form the Tarnished encounters during the festival. The other possibility is that Radahn was always a rather hefty lad. So where does this idea come from then, that Radahn experienced a surge in physical growth? As you could say, it has infected the Elden Ring zeitgeist. Well, you'll never find anything in the game directly stating it. Conjecture largely based on 2 items, the first of which being Radahn's remembrance. The Red Lion General wielded gravitational powers which he learned in Celia during his younger days, all so he would never have to abandon his beloved but scrawny steed. The other item would be this one, the Starscourge Heirloom, specifically the icon for it more so than any flavor text surrounding it. As you can see, this shows Radahn atop a steed that is far closer to being a reasonable size for a man of his stature. By all means, this isn't confirmed either way, but I'm of the opinion that Radahn did not experience a growth spurt, gravity magic related or otherwise, for two main reasons. Well, on top of it never actually being mentioned, that is. First up, look at his swords, the Starscourge Greatswords. Radahn earned considerable renown as the Starscourge in his youth, and it is said that it was during this time he engraved the gravity crest upon these blades. This is corroborated with the heirloom. The mightiest hero of the demigods confronted the falling stars alone. Once more, this is referenced in one of the monuments found in-game, which states, "The Starscourge's conflict. Radahn alone holds Celia secure and stands tall to shatter the stars." As is plain, the swords were used by Radahn during his youth, almost certainly during the Starscourge conflict. So unless there is some wild notion that the gravity crest allows the swords to change size somehow, these are the same blades, meaning that Radahn would have been using absurdly oversized weapons. So, why is the horse the right size in the heirloom? Doubtless for the same reason the blades are missing the gravity crests. Artistic license. After all, in the context of the setting, this heirloom is a small pendant, and you might need to take some liberties crafting something like that to make it visibly apparent what is happening. And I wouldn't say, personally, that taking statues or carvings literally is necessarily good evidence. After all, it isn't like those statues of the primordial serpents in Lothric are anatomically or size accurate. Frampt never had wings, nor did Karth, and there are many other statues, carvings, and things like this throughout the series that are not accurate 100%. Beyond that, if Radahn's steed was always scrawny, then that would make a lot more sense as to why Radahn wishes to learn gravity magic, because even a regular-sized Radahn wearing armor wouldn't be able to ride such a miserly beast. It makes a lot more sense to me that Radahn befriended this unlikely horse, this unlikely steed, and that was partially why he learned gravity magic, so that he could make Leonard his trusty companion. Ultimately, it's not too important, you can decide for yourself as to the exact specifics concerning Radahn's size. What is important, however, would be this conquest of the stars. What do we know about this? Well, Selen told us that the stars alter the fate of the Carian royal family. Presumably, this includes Radahn, but even if he isn't considered royalty, as it is possible that the royalty only extends to the female part of the family, Rennala and Ranni, the latter of which is of course referred to as Lunar Princess Ranni. So far as I can remember off the top of my head, Radahn and Rykard are never referred to with any royal honorifics, as it were. But even if he isn't, it would still have an impact on his sister, Ranni. Radahn studied gravity magic in Celia. His master was an alabaster lord, and this gives us another quote attributed to Radahn. "I thank you for your tutelage. For now, I can challenge the stars." This line also seems to imply that it wasn't just for his horse's sake he learned gravity magic. Strangely enough, gravity magic itself isn't strongly associated with Celia. Most of the town's own sorceries are those that originated from the eternal city of Nokron, which sleeps beneath Celia. Most of these sorceries are also associated with assassination and stealth, but they could provide a possible clue. One of the eternal cities was destroyed by an Astal, a star of ill omen, so we have a potential motive for Radahn, studying gravity magic to defend Celia from Astal. And Celia itself of course has a connection to the Eternal City. Indeed, you can find in Celia, seemingly locked away, some inhabitants of the Eternal City. There's also something else I want to go over quickly. The game tells us both that Radahn challenged the stars, but also that he held Sellia secure. Whilst saying that he held Sellia doesn't outright confirm a defense, it is implied to me. If you are holding a town or a village or any sort of structure, that does imply usually a defense. But I think it's fair to assume Radahn initiated the conflict, as it is phrased that way far more often. And I believe the only time it is mentioned that he held Sellia is during the monument. And there is a slight distinction because that is written in-game, as in the universe, whereas the other sources come from item descriptions, which aren't, generally speaking, written in-game. They are a sort of meta, fourth-wall breaking anomaly. Either way, even if he didn't initiate the conflict, he certainly ended it. And that's where we get to the conflict itself. What does it mean to arrest the cycle of the stars, to repulse them? Some take it to mean that Radahn has halted the motion of every star in space, which I don't think is wholly accurate, especially as that would make him stronger than almost every fictional character created. It is my belief that Radahn effectively used gravity magic to hold one or more Astels in stasis, preventing them from moving, preventing them from descending and destroying more Eternal Cities and wreaking havoc in general. You might say that Radahn was trying to repel certain outer gods, as whilst we know very little about the outer gods, it is implied to me that Astels are very similar to outer gods, if not a lesser form of them, judging from the Scorpion Stinger and the outer god of Rot, but I went more into that in my Elden Ring plot summary video. Unfortunately, this whole topic is very much up for debate. And well, I only say unfortunately, just because it's one of those things I can't make up my mind on. There is just no information really to help me decide and have a concrete theory to present to you. On the one hand, we can take it literally. People read fates in the movements of the stars, but what if those shooting stars are actually creatures that can descend to Earth and quite literally change your fate by destroying your city or having some other physical impact on your life? On the other hand, perhaps it is more symbolic, reading fate in the movement of the stars and other celestial bodies in the sense of classic astrology. And was Radahn doing this for the sake of his sister? Or perhaps for the Sellians or the Eternal City, to save them from the Astel? Was he, for some reason, working with Miquella to try and stave off the influence of the Outer Gods? Well, to me, the most likely option here seems that he was working with the Sellians or being influenced by the Eternal City. And there's virtually no information or clues as to how Radahn feels in regards to Ranni, Rykard, or Rennala. We know that he is somewhat proud to be Radagon's son, or at least that he takes pride in his red hair, and we know that he has a great deal of respect for Godfrey. But what we do know of Radahn seems to paint him as a upfront sort of guy, one who revels in the joy of battle perhaps, and has a great love of the battlefield, but not a bloodthirsty nor unpleasant individual, I think. Many years after the Starscourge conflict, we have the Shattering. During this, Radahn, who was still situated in Caelid, along with his famous Redmane soldiers, was drawn into combat with Malenia, Blade of Miquella. But what was the source of this conflict? Almost certainly, Malenia was the aggressor here. We know that she marched south through Liurnia and defeated a certain grafted individual, even if he hadn't started grafting at that point in time, before she reached Caelid. It was known as the Battle of Aeonia. During combat, Malenia was forced to abandon her pride and release the Scarlet Rot, blighting Caelid and Radahn in the process. Following this, she was rendered unconscious and her Cleanrot Knights set upon the blighted Radahn, impaling him with countless of their spears and paying for it with their lives. One knight, however, Finley, escaped, spiriting Malenia back to the Halig Tree, whereas Radahn was left a mad shell, wandering the battlefield. rotting away inside. Jeren, an associate of Radahn's, organised the Redmane Festival, a grand melee during which champions would have the chance to obtain Radahn's Great Rune. But in truth, the primary reason, at least given to us by Jeren, was to let the Mad General go out in a way that Jeren thought best for him, in combat. Of course, as to whether or not Jeren had ulterior motives working with the Carian royals, well, that's up for you to decide, but it might give us a little bit of a clue there as to how Radahn feels about Rennala and Ranni, considering that he is seemingly very good friends with Jeren. However, such as it is, champions are drawn to Caelid, Blythe, the Half-Wolf, Ironjar Alexander, amongst others, including the Tarnished. Working together, these heroes manage to best the mightiest of the demigods, who puts up a tremendous fight, even in his crippled, semi-impotent state. Ironjar Alexander is shattered with a single blow, yet lives to tell the tale, and Blythe seemingly comes out unscathed, whereas the Tarnished lands the final blow, and with Radahn's release from his affliction, so too are the stars released, with one, in particular, falling to Limgrave and opening up a new path for the Tarnished. Ultimately, then, Radahn is, in my opinion, one of the better characters in these stories, in the sense of right and wrong. Whilst I'll admit much of it is supposition, Radahn seems to have been quite an upfront, honourable sort of man. We know that he favoured single combat and would allow his opponent to prepare. We know that he cared for, at the very least, his own steed and considered it a dear companion. He took pride in his father and held a great respect for Godfrey's strength. Beyond all of that, just look at the loyalty he inspired in his men, including one knight, Ulgar, the longest-serving member of the Redmane Knights, who studied alongside Radahn, and even with their general in his unfortunate state, they continue to hold back the Scarlet Rot, fighting what seems to be an unwinnable battle in the Caelid wilds. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? What if, in some other time, some other world, we could cure Radahn of the Rot, and more so, cleanse Caelid, helping it avoid its doom? Perhaps our Tarnished was simply too late.